The council did not send Mara Greymourn to die beneath a blade. Blades left blood. Blood asked questions. They sent her to the Mourning Hives instead. At sunset, guards marched her through the western gates of Blackmere with a strip of funeral cloth tied around her throat and a clay bowl of grave honey pressed into her hands. The bowl was warm. That was the first cruelty. It pulsed softly against her palms, thick with the grief of wolves who had died before their last howls were answered. Behind her, the pack gathered in silence. No one stepped forward. That was the second cruelty. Mara had been left at the lower kennels as an infant, wrapped in an old Omega blanket with no housemark, no blood token, and no mother's name stitched into the cloth. In Blackmere, every wolf belonged somewhere. A den, a bloodline, a mate line, a grave. Mara belonged to work. She washed mourning stones after funerals. She carried water for widows. She scrubbed battle cloaks until other wolves' blood faded from the seams. The court called her useful. Useful was the word people gave to someone they did not intend to love. Elder Corvin Hale stood before the forbidden garden in amber robes embroidered with old wolf teeth. His silver beard was braided with gold thread, and his hands were too smooth for a man who claimed to serve grief. Behind him rose the Mourning Hives, hanging from black ironwood trees like enormous golden hearts. Their combs glowed behind veils of thorn and glass. Thousands of bees crawled across them, bright as living coins. No wolf entered that garden willingly. The bees did not feed on flowers. They fed on grief. "Abandoned Omega Mara Greymourn," Corvin called, his voice gentle enough to sound holy. "You have been chosen to carry the pack's unclaimed sorrow into the sacred hives." Chosen. Mara looked at the bowl in her hands. Whose sorrow is unclaimed? A murmur moved through the wolves. Corvin's smile did not break, but something behind it chilled. The dead do not need names to be honored. The living say that when they want to keep the names. The guards beside her tightened their grip on their spears. At the top of the stone steps, Alpha King Cassian Blackmere turned his head. Until then, he had stood like a war statue beneath the dusk. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, wrapped in black armor and an ash-gray wolf mantle. His face was stern and beautiful in a way that did not ask to be admired. His amber eyes held command, but behind that command was exhaustion buried too deep to be accidental. His wolf shadow stood behind him, huge, thin, wrong. It was not gone. It was worse than gone. It remained, but hollowed, ribs of darkness showing through its shape, as if something had been drinking from it year after year. Mara's fingers tightened around the bowl. The grave honey stirred. Cassian saw it. So did Corvin. The elder lifted one hand. "The hives grow restless. Do not delay." Mara looked toward the forbidden garden. Golden light shimmered beyond the gate, thick and beautiful and sickening. Funeral gold, tomb gold. The kind nobles painted on grief so no one had to look at the wound underneath. Her task was simple. Walk to the first hive, pour the grave honey at its root, kneel, let the bees come. The council said the bees lifted sorrow from the pack and stored it safely in sacred combs. But servants whispered other things, that old nobles grew stronger after every mourning season, that young warriors weakened, that dead wolves stopped visiting dreams after the hives fed. Mara had carried sealed honey jars to council chambers at night. She knew grief could be stored, and anything stored could be stolen. A guard shoved her forward. She stumbled, but she did not spill the bowl. That small refusal was all she owned. The ironwood gate opened. Every bee went silent. Even Cassian's starved wolf shadow flinched. Mara stepped into the forbidden garden, and the gate closed behind her. The world changed at once. No court, no banners, no spears, only golden hives, black trees, and the soft beating of thousands of wings. It should have sounded like hunger. It sounded like weeping. Mara walked to the nearest hive. Its surface pulsed beneath amber wax. Shapes moved inside the comb. Not bees, not fully wolves, but impressions of grief pressed into sweetness. A mother's howl, a warrior's last breath, a pup's unfinished cry. Sorrow packed so tightly it had forgotten how to return home. Her hands trembled. "I am sorry," she whispered. No one had ordered her to say it. Perhaps that was why the hive heard. The bees turned toward her all at once. Outside the gate, Corvin raised his staff. "Kneel." Mara did not kneel. Cassian stepped down one stair. "Mara," he said. Her name crossed the garden like a blade drawn slowly from a sheath. Corvin's voice sharpened. "Majesty, do not speak to the offering." Offering. There it was. Not chosen. Not honored. Offered. Mara looked back at the hive and poured the grave honey onto the roots. The golden liquid sank into the black soil. For one breath, nothing happened. Then the hive split open. Bees poured out in a living stream of gold. The court cried out beyond the gate. The guards backed away. Corvin lifted both hands, forming an old command sign with his fingers. But the bees ignored him. They flew straight to Mara. She closed her eyes. No sting came. Tiny feet touched her hair, her cheeks, her throat, her wrists. They did not drink from her. They listened. Gold light spread across her skin, warm and trembling. The bees rose around her head. They formed a crown. Not a queen's crown, a mourning crown. A circle of living gold made for the one person who had heard grief as grief, not as harvest. Behind Mara, from inside the glowing hive, a dead wolf howled. Then another, then hundreds. The sound tore through Blackmere. Cassian's hollow wolf shadow lifted its head for the first time in years. Elder Corvin Hale stepped back, all softness gone from his face. "Honey, moon blood," he whispered. A counselor beside him went pale. "Can she feed the hives?" Corvin stared at Mara as the dead wolves howled through the gold. "No," he said. "She can return what we harvested." The dead wolves kept howling from inside the hive. Not as ghosts, not as beasts returned to flesh, as grief finally given a mouth. The sound rolled through the forbidden garden in golden waves, shaking the black ironwood trees until old honey dripped from their branches like candlelight. Beyond the gate, living wolves staggered beneath the force of it. Some covered their ears. Some fell to their knees. Some began to weep before they understood why. Mara stood before the split hive with bees circling her head in a bright mourning crown. Not heavy, not royal. Alive. The bees moved in a slow ring above her brow, each tiny body burning with soft gold. Their wings hummed against her skin, but no sting came. They did not worship her. They did not ask her to command them. They pressed close as if she were the first warm thing in years that had not tried to take sorrow and lock it away. Elder Corvin Hale found his voice first. "Seal the garden." The guards at the gate hesitated. Cassian's wolf shadow was still staring at Mara. The hollow beast behind the Alpha King had lifted its head, and for the first time the shape of its ribs seemed less sharp. A thin gold thread had risen from the hive and moved toward it, not entering, only circling as if asking permission. Cassian looked at Corvin. Why would the hives answer her? Corvin's face had gone calm again, but Mara saw the effort beneath it. Because grief is foolish near abandoned things, it mistakes emptiness for a vessel. Mara turned toward him. The bees turned with her. Corvin took one small step back. That step told her more than his words. He was not afraid she would die. He was afraid she would not. Mara looked down at the grave, honey soaking into the roots. The hive had not swallowed it. It had opened around it. Inside the comb, shapes pressed outward. Paws, muzzles, hands, faces blurred by amber light. Grief packed into sweetness. Howls sealed until the living could no longer hear who they had lost. A woman at the gate gave a broken cry. Mara recognized her, Widow Aline, who had lost both sons in the southern raids. For months she had come to the mourning stones, placed flowers, and left dry-eyed, ashamed because no dream wolf visited her sleep. The council said some grief was too deep to return. A gold bee left Mara's crown. It flew through the bars and landed on Aline's chest. The widow stiffened. Then a sound came from her throat that was not speech. A pup's howl. Small. Unfinished. Aline collapsed to her knees, clutching her own heart. Tovan? The bee dissolved into gold dust against her mourning dress. Aline sobbed once, and the entire courtyard seemed to breathe with her. Mara understood then. The hives were not full because the dead had too much grief. They were full because the living had been denied it. Corvin snapped. Remove that woman. No guard moved quickly enough. Cassian's gaze had not left the widow. Why was her son's last howl in your hive? Corvin bowed his head just enough to look respectful. All war grief is gathered for the stability of the pack. You know this law. I know what I was told. A dangerous silence followed. The elder's eyes flicked toward the noble standing closest to the steps. Mara saw them now in the hive light. Old Lord Voust, whose hands had stopped trembling after the last mourning season. Lady Edrin, whose white hair had regained a golden sheen. 3 council elders with honey-bright veins glowing faintly beneath thin skin. They did not look sad. They looked hungry. Mara felt the bees grow hotter around her. The mourning crown dipped lower, brushing her temples. 100 voices pressed at the edge of her hearing. Not words yet, only need. Mother to son, brother to sister, mate to mate, alpha to fallen guard. Grief did not want to be stored. It wanted to find the one who could survive hearing it. Cassian moved toward the gate. Corvin lifted his staff. Majesty, if you open that garden while the hives are unsettled, you risk every wolf here. Mara saw the trap. Again, fear wrapped around Law. Law wrapped around him. If Cassian entered, Corvin would blame her for any harm. If he stayed out, the council would keep naming her an offering. So Mara stepped closer to the hive. The bees thickened around her wrists. Mara, Cassian said. There was warning in it, not command. That mattered. She did not look away from Corvin. If I am only an abandoned vessel, then one returned. Howl should not frighten you. Corvin's smile thinned. Child, you do not understand what grief becomes when handled carelessly. No, Mara said. I understand what it becomes when hoarded. The golden hive pulsed. A second bee left her crown. Corvin's hand shot beneath his robe. Too late. The bee landed on his sleeve. Gold light spread across the amber fabric, revealing threads sewn inside it, tiny honey seals, each one holding a trapped howl. Not one, dozens. The sleeves of the noble elder were lined with stolen mourning. The courtyard saw. Corvin went still. Cassian's wolf shadow rose behind him, larger now, starving and furious. Mara lifted her hand, and the bees gathered above her palm like a small sun. She did not know how to command them, so she asked, "Return one more." The hive answered. Every honey seal in Corvin's sleeve began to scream. Every honey seal in Corvin's sleeve began to scream. Not with one voice, with dozens. Small howls, broken howls, mate cries, death breaths, last names whispered into blood and never returned to the ones who needed them. The sound tore through the courtyard until even the stone wolves carved along the gate seemed to bare their teeth. Corvin ripped his sleeve back, but the golden light had already exposed what was sewn beneath the amber cloth. Thin wax threads lined the inside of his robe, each one glowing with stolen mourning. Some were old and dark, almost spent. Some still pulsed with fresh grief. The court saw. So did Cassian. His face did not change quickly. That made the change worse. The Alpha King went still first, then cold, then something far beneath cold. "Take off the robe," he said. Corvin bowed his head slightly. "Majesty, grief, work is not understood by those outside the council. Take it off." The order rolled across the courtyard. Cassian's hollow wolf shadow rose behind him, ribs of darkness widening, as if it had smelled food after years of starvation. The golden thread from the hive circled the beast again, and this time it touched one thin rib. The wolf shadow shuddered. Cassian's hand curled at his side. Mara saw pain strike him and knew the grief in the hives was not only feeding old nobles, it was starving the king's wolf of what every wolf needed to remain whole: mourning, memory, and the strength that came after surviving both. Corvin saw her understanding. His soft mask vanished. He sliced the glowing sleeve with a hidden blade. The honey seals burst. A storm of stolen howls flew not toward their owners, but into the garden, straight at Mara. The bees screamed around her. Gold became blinding. Grief entered her like a river forced through a keyhole. Mara staggered back against the hive. Faces flashed behind her eyes. Widow Aline's son reaching through smoke. A border guard dying with his brother's name in his mouth. A young she-wolf buried without her mate hearing her last breath. A pup crying for a mother who had woken for years with a dry heart because the council had taken even her sorrow. Too many, too fast. Mara dropped to one knee. The mourning crown dipped and broke apart, bees scattering across her hair and shoulders in wild circles. Corvin lifted his hands to the court. You see, the abandoned vessel cannot hold sacred grief. She tears it open. If the gate is not sealed, she will drown every wolf here in dead voices. Fear moved faster than truth. Wolves backed away. Widows clutched their throats. Guards lifted spears toward the garden bars. Cassian stepped down another stair. Open the gate. Corvin turned sharply. Majesty, no living alpha enters the hives during a grief breach. Open it. If you cross that threshold, your wolf may not survive what she has awakened. Cassian's eyes went to Mara. She was shaking under the swarm, one hand pressed to the hive, the other clawing at the soil as if she could anchor herself against the dead pouring through her. She did not look powerful. She looked breakable. That made what she did next more dangerous than any crown. She lifted her head. Aline, she gasped. The widow at the gate froze. Mara forced one golden howl away from the storm and held it between both trembling hands. It burned like liquid sunlight. She could feel Corvin's command trying to twist it back into storage, trying to make grief useful again instead of true. Mara pushed it through the bars. The howl entered Aline's chest. The widow collapsed, sobbing her son's name, but this time her grief did not hollow her. Color returned to her face. Her wolf shadow, thin and faded moments before, rose behind her with its head bowed over her shoulder. One returned grief. One living wolf strengthened. The courtyard understood too late. Corvin's fear had not been that grief would destroy the pack. His fear was that returned grief would heal it. Cassian looked from Aline to Mara, then to the old nobles. Lord Vaust's hands had begun to tremble again. Lady Edrin's golden veins darkened under her skin. The council elders clutched their sleeves as if their stolen strength might leak out in front of everyone. Mara tried to return another howl. Her body failed. The swarm thickened around her throat, not attacking, but holding her upright. The hive behind her pulsed open wider, revealing chambers stacked with amber grief. Too much for one abandoned girl. Too much for any one body. Cassian reached the gate. This time, the guards opened it before Corvin could speak. The Alpha King entered the forbidden garden. Every bee turned toward him. His wolf shadow followed, trembling, hollow, hungry. Mara tried to stand. Do not come closer. Cassian stopped. Not because Corvin warned him, because she did. That mattered. The golden swarm parted between them, making a narrow path of light. Cassian's gaze held hers, hard and unreadable, but his voice came lower than before. What do you need? No one had asked Mara that in her life. The question nearly broke what the grief had not. She looked at the hive, at the stolen howls raging inside her, at Corvin reaching slowly for another sealed fold hidden beneath his robe. Names, she whispered. Cassian turned to the courtyard. Then every wolf who has lost someone will speak their dead. Corvin's face drained of color. Majesty, if they name the dead, the hives will empty. Cassian looked back at him. Good. The first wolf stepped forward, then another, then 10. As names began to rise from the pack, the mourning hives opened all at once. And deep inside the largest hive, something answered Cassian's wolf by name. The largest hive spoke the king's wolf name. Rovan. Cassian went still. Every bee in the forbidden garden stopped moving for one breath, hanging in the air like sparks caught inside amber. The names of the dead faltered on the tongues of the pack. Even Corvin's hand froze inside his robe. Mara looked at Cassian. The name had not come from a wolf's mouth. It had come from the deepest chamber of the hive. His hollow wolf shadow lifted its head behind him, and the ribs of darkness inside its body shivered. The golden thread circling it tightened, not like a chain, but like something trying to remember where warmth belonged. "Who knows that name?" Mara asked. Cassian's jaw hardened. "No one living should." That answer was enough. Corvin recovered first. "Majesty, step away from the hive. A wolf's true name spoken by morning wax is not healing. It is bait." Cassian did not move. His eyes stayed on the hive, but his voice cut toward the elder. "Why would my wolf's name be inside your sacred comb?" Corvin's face was pale in the gold light. "Because every alpha's grief belongs to the pack." "No," Mara said. The word left her before fear could stop it. Corvin turned on her. "You know nothing of alpha grief." Mara stood with bees clustering along her arms, grief still burning through her veins from the howls he had released into her. She was shaking, but the swarm held her upright. "I know when something has been taken without asking." The largest hive pulsed. Inside its amber wall, a shape pressed outward. Not a dead wolf. Not fully. A memory. Cassian as a boy, kneeling beside a black funeral bier, a woman's hand slipping from his. A young wolf shadow, smaller then, throwing its head back to howl. Before the sound could leave its throat, golden bees swarmed the chamber. Council hands sealed honey over the grief. Corvin, younger but already silver-eyed with hunger, whispered, "An alpha must not be weakened by mourning." The memory broke. Cassian's wolf shadow staggered. So did Cassian. Mara reached toward him, then stopped before touching. "They took your first grief." His face did not soften. It emptied. The kind of emptiness that came when a wound finally learned it had been made on purpose. "My mother," he said. No one in the courtyard answered. Some lowered their eyes. Others looked toward the old nobles whose honey-bright veins had begun to dim. Corvin lifted both hands. "I preserved him. A boy king drowning in grief cannot hold a pack after war. The council made him strong enough to rule." "You made him unable to mourn," Mara said. Cassian's wolf shadow turned toward her. Not threatening. Listening. Mara felt the mourning crown lower around her brow. The bees were not giving her a throne. They were giving her responsibility. Every grief in the hive had a name. Every name had a direction. If she returned the wrong sorrow to the wrong heart, it would not heal. It would wound again. She looked at Cassian. "If I return this, it must go to both of you." His eyes narrowed. "Both?" "You and Rovan." At the sound of the wolf name spoken by her, the hive opened another inch. Cassian took one step toward her. Corvin struck his staff against the ground. Amber light flashed across the courtyard. The old nobles cried out. Lord Voust collapsed to one knee. Lady Edrin clutched her chest. 3 council elders bent over their hands as golden veins beneath their skin turned black at the edges. Corvin's voice rose. "Look well, Majesty. This is what happens when sacred grief is pulled carelessly from its vessels. These elders hold the old pack lines together, empty the hives, and you kill the houses that built Blackmere." Mara understood the hostage. Not with knives, with age, with politics, with bodies already fed too long on what was stolen. The pack stared in horror as the old nobles trembled. Compassion could become another cage if Corvin placed it correctly. Cassian looked at the elders, then at the hives, then at Mara. There was the trap again. If he ordered the grief returned, elders might die, and the council would call Mara a murderer. If he stopped her, The pack remained hollow. Mara stepped forward before he could choose for her. No one lives forever because someone else is not allowed to mourn. Corvin's eyes flashed. Easy words from a girl with no house to lose. The insult struck. For one breath, Mara was again the infant with no stitched name, the servant at funeral floors, the girl no one expected to grieve because no one had ever claimed her. Then Widow Aline, still on her knees by the gate, raised her head. "She has a house," Aline said, voice broken but clear. "The morning returned my son." Another wolf stepped forward, a border guard with shaking hands. "My brother's name was Darren." A young she-wolf whispered, "My mate was Lysa." More names rose. Not all at once. Obi-Wan. The hives answered each name with a soft gold pulse. The nobles weakened with every true grief returning to its owner. Corvin's calm cracked. He drew a sealed honeycomb from beneath his robe, darker than the others, almost black. Mara felt the bees recoil. Cassian's wolf shadow snarled silently. "What is that?" Cassian asked. Corvin's mouth twisted. "The grief no pack survives, receiving." He crushed the black comb in his fist. Dark honey spilled over his palm. The garden filled with a howl so deep every living wolf dropped to the ground. Mara's mourning crown shattered into frantic bees. Inside the broken sound, she heard thousands of unnamed dead, and beneath them all, one infant cry. Her own. The infant cry cut through the garden sharper than any howl. Mara dropped both hands to the soil. The black honey spread from Corvin's fist in thick, dark ribbons, crawling across the roots of the mourning hives like living tar. Wherever it touched gold wax, the light dimmed. Bees fell from the air, not dead, but stunned, their wings trembling in the dirt. The cry came again. Small, hungry, alone. Mara pressed one hand to her mouth. She knew that sound. Not because she remembered being an infant. No one remembered that. But some grief lived beneath memory, hidden in the body before words ever arrived. The sound entered her ribs and found an empty place that had always been there. Her own first grief. The grief of being left where no arms came back. Corvin watched her understand. "There," he said softly. "That is what the hives keep from swallowing the pack whole. Unclaimed sorrow. Nameless grief. The grief no family wants, no den admits, no bloodline carries." Cassian's voice was low. "You stored abandoned children in that comb." Corvin did not look ashamed. "I stored what would have poisoned the pack." Mara lifted her head. "No, you stored what no one could accuse you of stealing." The black honey pulsed. Around the courtyard, wolves began to shake. The named grief they had started to reclaim faltered beneath this darker sound. It was harder to face a son, a mate, a brother, but abandoned grief had no face. That made it vast. That made it useful to men like Corvin. The old nobles recovered strength as the black comb spread. Their golden veins brightened again. Mara saw it. Cassian saw it. Corvin's secret was not only that he harvested grief, it was that nameless grief fed the nobles best, because no one came demanding it back. Mara tried to stand. The infant cry struck again, and her knees buckled. Cassian stepped toward her. "Do not," Corvin warned. "If she carries unclaimed grief into you, Majesty, your wolf will drown in every child the pack forgot." Cassian stopped one pace away. Not from fear, from listening. Mara hated that he listened so well. It made his restraint feel like respect and danger at once. "What do you need?" he asked. The same question as before. This time, Mara knew the answer would cost more. "A witness." Cassian's eyes held hers. The black honey crawled toward her fingers. Mara forced herself not to pull away. If she refused her own grief, Corvin would be right. He would keep calling it poison. He would keep feeding it to old bodies until every abandoned child became fuel for people who had already lived too long on stolen mourning. Cassian turned toward the courtyard. His voice carried over the hives, over the crying, over the fearful wolves. Mara Greymourn was abandoned in Blackmere. That grief belongs to her. It will not be stored without a name again. The garden shook, not because he commanded it, because someone had finally witnessed what the pack had left unnamed. The infant cry changed. It did not stop. It found direction. The black honey recoiled from the hive roots and streamed toward Mara in a narrow line. The bees rose weakly from the ground, following it. Mara braced herself as the grief entered her palms. Pain came first, then cold, then an image, a storm-dim kennel, a torn omega blanket, a baby wrapped too tightly to move her hands, a woman's shadow bending over her, not abandoning, hiding, a gold mark pressed to the child's chest with shaking fingers before the woman was dragged away by council guards. Mara gasped. Corvin's face hardened. Cassian saw that too. "What did you show her?" he demanded. Corvin lifted his chin. "Memory is unreliable under grief." "No," Mara whispered. Her voice shook, but the bees gathered around it as if holding the sound upright. "She did not leave me." The black honey burned through her veins, and a small mark appeared just below her collarbone. Not a crown, not a moon, but a honeycomb crescent, faint and gold beneath her skin. The mourning crown began to reform above her head. Smaller this time, sharper. Corvin raised his staff. "Stop her before the unclaimed grief chooses her." The guards did not move. Widow Aline stood first, then the border guard who had named his brother, then 10 more wolves whose returned grief had made their shadows stronger, not weaker. Cassian's hollow wolf shadow stepped behind Mara, not kneeling, guarding. Corvin looked at the wolf and understood the danger before anyone else. If Cassian's wolf accepted Mara as witness to grief, the council's entire harvest would become theft in the eyes of the pack. He reached into his robe again and drew out a second comb. This one was clear. Inside it, suspended in pale gold, was a woman's final breath. Mara's heart stopped. The bees around her went silent. Corvin smiled without warmth. "If you want your first grief returned, child, perhaps you should hear the woman who gave it to you." He crushed the clear comb. A female voice filled the garden. "Mara, do not let them crown you until you know what the gold demands. Mara, do not let them crown you until you know what the gold demands." The woman's voice moved through the forbidden garden like warm honey poured over a blade. Mara could not breathe. The clear comb shattered in Corvin's hand, and the final breath inside it unfurled in pale gold. It did not rush toward the nobles. It did not sink into the hives. It came to Mara slowly, stopping just before her face as if afraid to touch her without permission. A scent opened inside the breath. Rain on kennel straw, milk warmed over embers, blood hidden beneath a torn omega blanket, a woman singing without sound because guards were outside the door. Mara knew the voice in a way no memory could explain. "Mother," she whispered. The pale gold breath trembled. Corvin watched her with the patience of a man setting a snare. Every abandoned child dreams the voice is kind. Mara did not look at him. The breath circled her once, and the honeycomb crescent beneath her collarbone burned brighter. The bees above her head tried to complete the mourning crown again, but the woman's voice sharpened. "No, not yet." The bees stopped. Cassian stood near the gate, his hollow wolf shadow behind Mara like a dark wall. His eyes were fixed on the breath, not with disbelief, but with the grim recognition of someone who had heard grief imprisoned before. "What is the gold demanding?" he asked. Corvin answered first. "Balance. The hives must always be fed. Grief cannot simply be returned, Majesty. It must be carried by someone strong enough to hold what lesser wolves cannot." Mara finally turned toward him. "You mean someone powerless enough to blame when it breaks them?" The old nobles shifted uneasily. Corvin's face remained gentle. "Honey, moon blood was born for this burden." The pale breath flared. Mara's mother spoke again, clearer now. "No, honey, moon blood was born to guide grief home, not become its grave." The largest hive pulsed in answer. The mourning crown above Mara tilted, its living gold no longer soft. She felt its weight now not on her head, but in her bones. If she let it close fully while every stolen grief remained unnamed, the hives would pour through her. She would become the vessel Corvin wanted, sacred, golden, admired, and hollowed until nothing remained but a useful miracle. Her mother had known. That was why she warned her. Mara looked at the pack beyond the gate. The gold does not want me crowned first. It wants the grief named first. Corvin's eyes flashed. Cassian caught the change. That is what you feared. I feared chaos, Corvin said. No, Cassian replied. You feared return. The Alpha King stepped fully into the garden. The bees turned toward him, but Mara lifted one hand before his starving wolf could move closer. Not too close. He stopped at once. The obedience was quiet. The court saw it. Mara saw Corvin see it, and the elder's mouth tightened. If Cassian began answering her warnings instead of his council's rituals, the old order would crack faster than the hives. Cassian's voice lowered. Tell me what to name. Mara looked toward the largest hive, where his wolf name had spoken before. The golden comb opened in layers, revealing the memory of a funeral bier, a boy king, and a howl stolen before it could finish. Your mother, Mara said. Her grief is still in there. Cassian's face closed. For a moment, he looked less like a king and more like the boy from the hive memory, kneeling beside a body no one allowed him to mourn. The pack waited. Corvin's voice slipped in softly. Majesty, private grief need not be displayed before lesser wolves. Cassian looked at him. That sentence has ruled me long enough. The hives hummed. Cassian turned to the largest comb. Her name was Queen Merwin Blackmere. The golden hive opened. A sound came out. Not a scream. Not a royal lament. A mother's last breath, held in honey for years, finally finding the son who had been told strength meant silence. Cassian's wolf shadow dropped to its knees behind Mara. This time, not in weakness, in grief. The golden breath entered Cassian's chest and his wolf shadow at once. The hollow ribs filled slightly. Darkness thickened into fur. The beast bowed its head and shook under the weight of mourning finally returned. Cassian did not weep, but his hand pressed once against his heart as if something there had begun beating after years of obedience. Around the courtyard, the pack lowered their eyes. Not to the king, to the grief. Mara's mother's breath circled Mara again, warmer now. That is the way. Name, return, strength follows. Corvin's calm broke. He lifted both hands, and from beneath his amber robe, dozens of hidden combs flashed black, gold, clear, red. Then let us see how many names this abandoned Omega can bear before she begs for the crown to close. He crushed them all. The forbidden garden erupted. Hundreds of stolen griefs burst into the air, not in order, not with names, but wild and starving. They slammed into the bees, the hives, the wolves at the gate. Mara staggered as voices crowded her skull. Mother, brother, mate, child, alpha, home. Too many. Cassian reached for her, then stopped when she shook her head. Mara sank both hands into the black soil. Not through me, she gasped. The bees swarmed down around her arms. Through the roots, the mourning hives answered. Gold light shot through the ground in branching veins, racing beneath the courtyard toward every wolf who had ever left a grief unnamed. For one breath, it seemed to work. Then the oldest hive cracked open from within. A shape moved behind the honey. Not a wolf, not a memory. A woman crowned in dead gold. Mara's mother's breath went cold. Corvin smiled through the storm. The first honeymoon healer, he said, and the reason your bloodline was buried. The woman inside the oldest hive opened her eyes. Every bee in the forbidden garden dropped silent. She stood behind the cracked honey, as if preserved beneath gold for centuries, her hair flowing in thick amber strands, her skin pale beneath a crown that was not made of metal but dead bees fused into a halo. Her dress looked woven from old funeral cloth, Around her throat, honey had hardened like a collar. Mara could not move. The honeycomb crescent beneath her collarbone burned, as if answering a wound older than her own life. Cassian's wolf shadow rose behind her, stronger than before but still thin along the ribs. It growled at the hive, yet the sound carried grief more than threat. Corvin lowered his head with something like reverence. Illyra Goldmourn, first honey, moon healer, the saint who taught Blackmere how grief could preserve a kingdom. Mara stared at the woman's trapped face. Preserve? Her mother's breath trembled beside her ear. No, they made her preserve them. The dead gold crown around Illyra's head shifted. Bees that should have been long dead moved one by one. Illyra lifted one hand against the inside of the hive. Her palm pressed into the honey, and the entire garden filled with a memory. Not words, a vision. A battlefield after the first wolf plague. Bodies laid in rows. Living wolves too exhausted to howl. Children clutching at silent mothers. In the middle stood Illyra, young then, alive, bareheaded, with gold bees circling her hands. She touched the grieving, and their sorrow did not vanish. It changed. Widows stood. Warriors breathed. Wolves whose shadows had faded lifted their heads again. She had not taken grief away. She had taught it how to become strength. Then the council came. Not with chains at first. With praise. They called her blessed. Then necessary. Then sacred. Then too important to rest. They brought her grief after grief, name after name, until the living stopped mourning and simply delivered pain to her hands. When she refused to carry what belonged to others, they crowned her. The gold closed around her head. The hives were born from her body. The vision ended. Mara staggered, one hand pressed to the soil. Corvin spoke softly. She saved this pack. She was used until saving became a prison, Mara said. His eyes sharpened. All kingdoms are built on useful suffering. Cassian turned toward him. Say that again? Corvin did not. The old nobles behind the gate were no longer pretending calm. Their stolen gold veins flickered under their skin. The return of named grief had weakened them. The unclaimed grief had frightened them. But Illyra's waking terrified them. Mara understood why. If the first healer spoke, every holy law built from her captivity would crack. Corvin lifted his staff. The dead, gold crown is the price of honey, moon blood. Let the girl deny it if she dares. Without a vessel, grief will flood the pack. With a vessel, Blackmere survives. Mara looked at Illyra's crown, then at the mourning crown still broken around her own head. Both were gold. Only one was living. That difference mattered. Cassian stepped closer, careful not to touch her. Mara. His voice held warning, not command. She was beginning to know the difference. I hear her, Mara whispered. Illyra's lips moved behind honey. No sound came out. The bees around Mara rose, forming a thin golden bridge between her and the oldest hive. Corvin smiled, thinking she was being drawn to accept the crown. Mara stepped onto the bridge. Cassian's wolf shadow moved with her, but she lifted one hand. Stay. The great shadow stopped. Cassian stopped with it. That obedience rippled through the court harder than any shout. Mara walked to the cracked hive alone. Gold light touched her bare feet. The voices of the stolen griefs pressed around her, begging to be named, returned, carried, ended. She wanted to help them all. That wanting was dangerous. That was how they had trapped Illyra. Mara placed her palm against the honey. Not to open it. To listen. Illyra's silent mouth formed 3 words. Ask the bees. Mara closed her eyes. The bees were not the prison. They were the witnesses. Who crowned her? Mara asked. The garden answered. The bees turned from Illyra's hive toward the council gate. Not toward all nobles, toward 7 bloodlines. Gold light struck their family rings. Lord Voust, Lady Edrin, Elder Corvin. 4 more old houses whose heirs had sat closest to the hives for generations, drinking grief and calling it stewardship. The pack saw. Corvin's face twisted. Lies made of swarm. Light. Mara opened her eyes. No. Witness. Illyra's dead gold crown cracked once. A single dead bee fell from it and became living gold before it touched the ground. The hives trembled. Cassian's mother's grief, newly returned, strengthened his wolf shadow enough for the beast to step beside Mara's path without crossing it. His voice came low behind her. What does she need? Mara looked at the trapped first healer, not a savior. She turned toward the pack. She needs every house that fed on her to give back one true grief. The old nobles recoiled. Corvin laughed, harsh at last. They will die. Mara's voice shook, but held. No, they will mourn. The difference broke something in the air. One young noblewoman stepped forward from House Edrin, tears shining on her face. My grandmother never cried when my father died. Lady Edrin hissed, "Be silent." But the young woman touched her family ring and whispered, "His name was Orin." Gold tore from Lady Edrin's veins and flew into the hive. Illyra inhaled. Her dead crown cracked again. Then Corvin raised his staff and drove it into the soil. "If grief must return," he said, "then let it return as plague." The oldest hive split wide. Black gold bees poured out, not living and not dead, their wings stained with centuries of hoarded sorrow. And they flew straight toward Mara's heart. The black gold bees flew straight toward Mara's heart. Cassian moved before thought could stop him. His wolf shadow lunged with him, larger now, darker, ribs half filled by returned grief. The beast threw itself between Mara and the swarm, jaws opening in a silent snarl. "No," Mara cried. Too late. The first black gold bees struck the wolf shadow. They did not sting like living bees. They entered. Cassian staggered as if blades had gone beneath his ribs. His wolf shadow bowed under the swarm, its dark body flashing with stolen sorrows that were not his. Plague beds, empty cradles, mothers coughing blood into cloth, fathers burying children without names. The council had not merely hoarded grief. They had let old grief rot until it curdled into sickness. Corvin's eyes shone. There. That is what comes when grief is returned without vessels. Mara ran to Cassian, but stopped before touching him. She remembered Illyra. The first healer had been trapped because she took too much into herself. Mara would not become another beautiful prison. The black gold bees circled Cassian's wolf shadow, searching for a way through him and into Mara. His face had gone pale, but he stayed upright, one hand pressed to his chest. "Tell me how to kill them," he said through clenched teeth. "You cannot kill grief." "Then move." "No." His eyes cut to her, furious. "Mara, do not say my name like a command." The words struck him hard enough to stop him. Even with plague grief burning through his wolf, he listened. Mara turned toward the swarm. The mourning crown above her head tried to close, instinctively offering to receive the black gold flood. She felt its promise. Take it, hold it, become sacred, become necessary, become ruined. She lifted both hands to the living gold and pulled the crown apart. Bees scattered around her in a shocked burst of light. Corvin's smile faded. Mara faced the black gold swarm. "I am not your hive." The bees trembled. For the first time, their wild motion faltered. Behind them, Illyra's cracked hive glowed weakly. The first honeymoon healer pressed both hands against the honey from within, watching Mara with sorrow and warning. Mara understood. The swarm was not seeking blood. It was seeking a place to be believed. She looked past Corvin to the 7 marked bloodlines at the gate. Their rings still glowed where the bees had named them. Their old nobles looked terrified. Their heirs looked trapped between shame and inheritance. "This plague came from grief you refused," Mara said. Lord Voust spat. "We refused nothing. Our houses survived." "On what?" No one answered. The black gold bees shifted toward the old nobles. Corvin raised his staff. "Do not listen. She will turn your dead against you." A young man from House Voust stepped forward despite his lord's glare. His face was grey with fear. My sister died in the first fever season. Grandfather said mourning her would weaken the house. Lord Voust snarled. Silence. The young man's voice broke. Her name was Sarah. The swarm recoiled. One black gold bee turned bright. Then another. A thin stream of poisoned grief left Cassian's wolf shadow and flew to the young man's chest. He doubled over, not dying, but sobbing, and his own wolf shadow rose behind him with its forehead pressed to the ground. Cassian drew a rough breath. Mara saw the rule. Named grief lost its poison. Not healed, not softened, simply no longer weaponized. She turned to the others. Names. Not apologies, not excuses. Names. Corvin struck his staff again, but the soil beneath him no longer answered cleanly. The roots of the Mourning Hives were listening to Mara now. One by one, voices began to rise. My mother was Elian. My mate was Rune. My child was Vessa. My brother was Halric. Each name pulled black from the swarm and returned gold to the bees. Each name weakened an old noble who had lived too long without carrying the weight of their own dead. Some collapsed, some wept. Some fought the grief until their rings cracked. Corvin watched his power draining through spoken names. Then he turned toward the largest hive. Mara felt the danger before she saw it. Cassian, she warned. Corvin drove his staff into the oldest root and twisted. The largest hive split open again, deeper this time, exposing a hidden chamber of dark amber behind Alira's prison. Inside it hung a single, enormous comb, shaped like a wolf's heart. Cassian's wolf shadow froze. Mara's mother's breath whispered at her ear. That is not his grief. Cassian stared at the heart comb, horror moving slowly over his face. What is it? Corvin's voice was no longer gentle. The pack's obedience. The comb pulsed. Every wolf in the courtyard stiffened. Mara watched golden threads stretch from the heart comb into the shadows of soldiers, widows, nobles, servants, even children. Not grief now. Submission. The council had harvested sorrow, then fed back obedience in its place. Cassian's wolf shadow roared at last, a broken sound made possible by grief returned. Corvin smiled through his fear. Break the hives, girl, and every wolf who fed on their comfort will lose the leash that kept them from turning on one another. Mara looked at the golden threads, then at the pack waiting in terror. The mourning crown reformed above her, but she did not let it close. Not yet. She stepped toward the obedience comb. Alira's cracked voice finally escaped the oldest hive. Do not touch it alone. Cassian reached her side. This time, Mara did not tell him to stop. The obedience comb split open, and from inside it came the voice of Cassian's dead mother, speaking a command she had never willingly given. Kneel to the council. The dead queen's voice rolled through the forbidden garden. Every wolf in the courtyard dropped, not willingly, not all at once. Their knees struck stone and soil in a wave, from soldiers to widows, from servants to young heirs, even the guards at the gate. Some fought it, teeth bared, hands clawing at their own throats, but the golden threads from the obedience comb tightened around their shadows and dragged them down. Cassian did not kneel. His wolf shadow did. The great beast's forelegs hit the black soil beside Mara. Its head bowed under the stolen command. Cassian staggered as if the force had struck his bones, but he remained standing, pale and shaking with the effort. Mara reached toward the wolf shadow. The obedience threads burned gold white. Do not touch it alone, Alira warned from inside the cracked hive. Mara stopped an inch from the wolf's bowed head. The living crown above her brow trembled, trying again to close. She could feel its terrible offer. Take the obedience into yourself. Carry it. Spare them. Become the hive. Become the answer. She pulled her hand back. No. Corvin's eyes sharpened. You would leave them kneeling? I will not free them by becoming another leash. The old counselor smiled. but fear had begun to show through the edges. Then you have no gift. Mara looked at the kneeling pack. Widow Aline fought the command with tears running down her face. The young man from House Voust had one hand pressed to the earth, whispering his sister's name again and again so he would not forget himself. Even the old nobles trembled now, because obedience did not care who had purchased comfort from it. A leash built for the weak could close around the powerful too. Cassian turned toward the obedience comb. His voice came rough. "That was not my mother." The comb pulsed again. Queen Merwin's voice returned, colder this time. "Kneel to the council." Cassian flinched, but did not bow. "My mother died telling me to stand." The largest hive shuddered. Mara heard it then, beneath the command, a softer breath, trapped under wax and old spell work. Not kneel, not counsel, something cut apart and rearranged until love became law. She turned to Cassian. "Say what she truly told you." His jaw locked. The command pressed harder. His wolf shadow sank lower. Blood slipped from Cassian's nose, dark against his mouth. Mara stepped closer, not touching, only standing where he could see her. Not for the court, not for the throne. For him. Her eyes flicked to his wolf. Cassian looked at the bowed beast, and something in him broke open quietly. She said, "Stand when grief bends you." The obedience comb cracked. The dead queen's false command warped, then split. Beneath it, Merwin Blackmere's true voice came through, faint and warm as a dying hand against a child's cheek. "Stand when grief bends you, my son." Cassian's wolf shadow rose. The golden threads around its neck snapped. Across the courtyard, wolves gasped as the command loosened. Not fully, but enough for some to lift their heads, enough for names to return to their mouths, enough for fear to turn toward Corvin. Mara understood the key. The obedience comb was built from stolen last words. Every command hid a grief. Every leash hid a love. "Speak the true words," she called to the pack. "Not what the council taught you, what your dead actually gave you." The courtyard shook with broken voices. "My brother told me to run. My mate said, 'Forgive our son.' My father said, 'Keep the den warm.' My child said she was not afraid." With every true memory spoken, obedience threads snapped from wolf shadows and flew back into the comb. Gold darkened, wax split. The old hives hummed so fiercely the ironwood trees bent. Corvin stumbled back. The 7 marked houses began to lose their stolen glow. He looked not at the pack, not at Cassian, but at Mara. "You should have accepted the crown," he said. Then he drove his staff into Alira's cracked hive. The first honeymoon healer screamed without sound. Dead gold bees erupted from her prison and swarmed around Mara, faster than Cassian's wolf could move. They did not sting her skin, they built. Gold hardened at her temples, at her throat, around her wrists. The mourning crown began turning into the dead crown. Cassian lunged, but the obedience threads lashed from the comb and caught his wolf shadow again, holding him back. Mara could not move. The dead gold bees sealed her feet to the soil. Corvin's voice shook with triumph and terror. "If grief must return, it will return through a vessel. Blackmere will have its healer, whether she consents or not." Mara's mother's final breath circled her face, frantic and fading. "Do not let it close." Alira pressed both hands against the honey wall of her hive. Cassian fought the golden threads, eyes fixed on Mara, with a fury that looked too close to helplessness. "Mara," he said. This time, her name was not warning. It was fear. The dead crown locked around her brow, and the oldest hive opened its mouth to pour every stolen grief into her. The oldest hive opened. Gold poured toward Mara like a sunrise meant to drown her. Every stolen grief inside Blackmere rushed for the dead crown locked around her brow. Widows' howls, mothers' last breaths, children's unfinished cries, soldiers' fear, mates' broken vows, alpha grief, omega grief, nameless grief, grief polished into obedience and fed back as law. Mara's knees hit the soil. The crown tightened. For one breath, she saw Illyra's fate waiting for her. Sacred, adored, hollowed, preserved behind honey until centuries called her sacrifice holy. No, the word did not come from her mouth. It came from every bee still living. The swarm shook around her, but it could not stop the crown alone. Cassian fought the obedience threads binding his wolf shadow, blood dark at his lips, amber eyes fixed on Mara as if his own body were a locked gate he could not break fast enough. "Mara," he said again. "Not command, not rescue. A plea." She lifted her head through the golden flood. "Do not ask me to hold it." Cassian understood before the court did. He turned to the kneeling pack. "Then stand and hold your own." The words struck harder than any alpha order because they carried no leash. His wolf shadow strained upward, and the true voice of Queen Merwin, freed from the obedience comb, moved through the garden one last time. "Stand when grief bends you." One wolf rose. "Vidolf Elen." She pressed a shaking hand to her heart. "Tovan was my son." A thread of grief tore away from Mara and flew into Aline. The widow cried out, but did not collapse. Her wolf shadow rose behind her, fuller than before, bowed around pain but not broken by it. Another wolf stood. "Darren was my brother." Another. "Lysa was my mate." Another. "Orin was my father." Names broke across the courtyard like dawn through storm clouds. Each one pulled grief from the crown before it could seal into Mara. The gold around her throat cracked. The bees swarmed faster, not building now, but loosening. Corvin staggered toward the hive, face twisted. "Stop speaking. You will kill the old houses." Lord Voust screamed as stolen gold drained from his veins. Lady Edrin fell to her knees, clawing at her family ring. Mara looked at them and felt no triumph. Only the cold clarity of truth returning to bodies that had hidden from it too long. "No," she whispered. "It will make them carry what they stole." Cassian's wolf shadow ripped one obedience thread apart. Then another. He stepped toward Corvin. The elder lifted his staff, but the bees covered it in gold wax before the command could form. For the first time, Corvin looked old without stolen mourning brightening his skin. "You need a vessel," he rasped. "All grief needs somewhere to go." Mara rose slowly. The dead crown cracked across her brow. "Yes," she said. "Home." She turned to Illyra's hive. The first honeymoon healer pressed her hands against the honey wall. Around her, the dead gold crown had split, and living bees crawled through the cracks like light returning to a sealed room. Mara placed one palm against the hive. Not to take. To open. "Illyra Goldmourn," she said, voice shaking but clear. "You were not born to be Blackmere's grave." The pack heard the name. The hives heard it. The bees answered. The oldest hive split from crown to root. Honey poured down in shining curtains, and Illyra stepped out, not flesh, not ghost, but grief given shape and freedom. Her dead crown fell apart into thousands of living bees. They flew upward, filling the garden with gold. The remaining dead crown around Mara's brow dissolved. Only a thin living mourning crown remained, light as breath, open at the front. Unfinished. Chosen only for as long as she chose to wear its work. Corvin tried to run. Cassian's restored wolf shadow crossed the garden in one bound and blocked him. The beast did not tear him apart. It lowered its massive head and growled with the grief of every wolf the council had silenced. Corvin dropped his staff. The bees wrapped him in wax from wrists to throat, leaving his mouth free. Mara understood why. Judgment here required names. Cassian faced the court. Elder Corvin Hale and the 7 marked houses harvested pack grief, sealed dead howls inside the mourning hives, and fed stolen sorrow to old bloodlines while wolves weakened and forgot how to mourn. The words went into the garden like iron stakes. No one could pretend not to hear. One by one, the old nobles were stripped of their honey seals. Some aged in a breath. Some wept for the first time in decades. Some cursed Mara until the bees covered their mouths with wax. not to silence truth, but to stop lies from feeding the hives again. Cassian turned to Mara. His wolf shadow stood behind him now, still scarred, still lean, but no longer hollow. It lowered its head to her, not kneeling to a queen, but recognizing the healer who had refused to become a prison. Mara's mother's final breath circled her one last time, warm against her cheek. "You guided it home," the voice whispered. Then the breath lifted into the hives and became light. Mara closed her eyes. When she opened them, Cassian was standing before her, not too close. "You saved my wolf," he said. "I returned what was his. You broke the council. I named what they stole." His mouth softened at the edge. "Then Blackmere will begin with names." Mara looked beyond him at the pack, widows holding their chests, warriors weeping openly, children staring as dead wolves howled from the hives one final time before their grief returned to the living. It was not beautiful in the clean way nobles preferred. It was raw. It was alive. "It will not be gentle," she said. "No," Cassian's gaze held hers, "but it will be true." He extended his hand. Mara looked at it for a long breath. She had entered the garden as an offering, abandoned because no house claimed her, expected to be emptied for the comfort of others. Now the bees circled above her in living gold, and the wolves of Blackmere lowered their heads not because she commanded them, but because she had returned their dead to them. She placed her hand in Cassian's. Not as Luna, not as a vessel, as Mara Greymourn, honeymoon healer, the abandoned Omega who taught a starving kingdom that grief was not meant to be harvested. It was meant to come home,